Welcome, friends. This is A Course in Miracles, Palm Beach Study Group. Tonight we're on Chapter 7, Section 9, The Extension of the Kingdom. It's on page 132 in the text. Only you can limit your creative power, but God wills to release it. He no more wills you to deprive yourself of your creations than he wills to deprive himself of his. Do not withhold your gifts to the sonship, or you withhold yourself from God. Selfishness is of the ego, but self-fullness is of spirit, because that is how God created it. The Holy Spirit is in the part of the mind that lies between the ego and the spirit, mediating between them always in favor of the spirit. To the ego, this is partiality, and it responds as if it were being sided against. To spirit, this is truth, because it knows its fullness and cannot conceive of any part from which it is excluded. So our creative power is our power to love and forgive. And God wills us to release that creative power. He doesn't want to deny us of our power to create as he does. He creates by extending himself in love, and he wants us to do the same thing. Now, the ego sees this is being selfish, because you're expanding the spirit, and when you do that, you're letting go of the ego. So it doesn't like that. But spirit is truth, and spirit knows that the truth is that you are indeed a spiritual being, and you are created in the image and likeness of your Father, and therefore you have the power to create in love, with love, as he does. And so the Spirit wants to foster that within you. Paragraph 2, Spirit knows that the awareness of all its brothers is included in its own, as it is included in God. The power of the whole sonship and of its creator is therefore Spirit's own fullness, rendering its creations equally whole and equal imperfection. The ego cannot prevail against a totality that includes God, and any totality must include God. Everything he created is given all his power because it is part of him and shares his being with him. Creating is the opposite of loss, as blessing is the opposite of sacrifice. Being must be extended. That is how it retains the knowledge of itself. Spirit yearns to share its being as its creator did. Created by sharing, its will is to create. It does not wish to contain God, but wills to extend his being. So all that's saying is that we're the Son of God in our oneness, and we need to be as our Father is and extend ourselves in love, and thus create as he did. and that this is the truth, and this is the power, and this is who we really are, and Spirit just wants to remind us of that. Are there any questions or comments? I'm sorry, you have.
I got to answer the door.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Please sit in silence for this time. Okay. We're on paragraph 3. The extension of God's being is Spirit's only function. Its fullness cannot be contained any more than can the fullness of its creator. Fullness is extension. The ego's whole thought system blocks extension and thus blocks your own function. It therefore blocks your joy so that you perceive yourself as unfulfilled. Unless you create, you are unfulfilled. But God does not know unfulfillment, and therefore you must create. You may not know your own creations, but this can no more interfere with their reality than your unawareness of your spirit can interfere with its being. So again, it's always ego versus spirit here, and that's what's going on inside our own minds. And I think we need to talk about creation. You know, a lot of us, again, we need to be concerned about the definition of the words. So in the ego world, we use the term creation in terms of like artistic creation, and that is a part of creation. Creating music and song and dance and painting and what have you. But that's how it manifests in the ego world. But remember, God created us by extending himself in love. And so from Spirit's point of view, that's what we're doing. When we create by expanding ourselves in love, as God does, then we are creating. And it says, you may not know your own creations, because this is kind of like invisible. We don't see it with ego eyes. We don't hear it with ego ears. But we have to understand that when we love, when we forgive, that we are extending ourselves in a spiritual way, that indeed we are creating. We may not be aware of those creations because we're not seeing them or hearing them or feeling them or sensing them with our ego senses, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. So we have to expand our definition of what we mean by creating when we're speaking of it in these terms. Any questions, comments? So, paragraph 4, The kingdom is forever extending because it is in the mind of God. You do not know your joy because you do not know your own self-fulfillment. Exclude any part of the kingdom from yourself, and you are not whole. A split mind cannot perceive its fullness and needs the miracle of its wholeness to dawn upon it and heal it. This reawakens the wholeness in it and restores it to the kingdom because of its acceptance of wholeness. The full appreciation of the mind's fullness makes selfishness impossible. I'll start that again. The full appreciation of the mind's self-fullness makes selfishness impossible and extension inevitable. That is why there is perfect peace in the kingdom. Spirit is fulfilling its function, and only complete fulfillment is peace. So all of this is happening in the mind of God. And the kingdom is forever extending in the mind of God. And that is where we find peace, because by doing that, it is fulfilling itself. God is fulfilling himself when he expands himself, and this is what brings him peace. And we need to mimic that. We need to follow in Spirit's footsteps. But if we're still operating in the ego world, then we're operating in the split mind. And sentence 4 says, a split mind cannot perceive its fullness, and it needs the miracle of its wholeness to dawn upon it and heal it. The miracle is the realizing the fullness of your spiritual mind and letting go of the ego mind so that your mind is not split anymore, but is unified in the oneness. There's only one of us, the oneness with God, the oneness of spirit, the oneness of the kingdom, the wholeness. It says, restore the kingdom in your mind, because accepting that is wholeness. And that is why there is perfect peace in the kingdom, because spirit is fulfilling its function, with which only complete fulfillment can do, and which brings peace. Yes, Dave.
This extension inevitable, what does that mean?
Well, that means that it's inevitable. It's going to happen regardless of what you think. It's not dependent on the ego mind. The full appreciation of the mind's self-fullness makes selfishness impossible and extension inevitable. In other words, it's inevitable that we will forsake the ego and find ourselves united totally in spirit. That's the promise of the Course, that this is all inevitable. It's teaching us how to get to that place, but it keeps promising us over and over again that there's no way you can fail. It may take 1,000,000 years, but it's inevitable. Any more? Are you good?
That's it. I'm good.
So paragraph 5 says, your creations are protected for you because the Holy Spirit, who is in your mind, knows of them and can bring them into your awareness whenever you will let him. They are there as part of your own being because your fulfillment includes them. The creations of every son of God are yours, since every creation belongs to everyone being created for the sonship as a whole. So there's the whole concept. We said earlier that you may not be aware of your spiritual creations. They're not on the same level as ego creations. But the Holy Spirit is aware, and the Holy Spirit protects your spiritual creations and holds them for you for the time when you do become aware of them, which is inevitable. You definitely will become aware of your spiritual creations in time. They are a part of our own being. And as we find our fulfillment in spirit, we will come to know them. And not only the ones that we think of ourselves as individual here in the ego world, but remember, there's only one of us. So it's saying all of the creations of all of the sons of God are yours, are mine. Because every creation belongs to everyone. That's how it is. There's really only one of us, because everything is created for the sonship as a whole. So that's a very large concept to wrap your mind around. And it's definitely something to meditate about, that oneness, that wholeness. Any questions? Yes.
Well, recently, I can see myself changing. Like in the past, I would make a donation to a particular cause, and not to a lot of other causes. But I seem to be spontaneously making financial donations, but without really thinking about it. They're what I like to do. I guess the feeling that I have enough to do this, even though I had enough to do it before. There's something that's changed in me to say it's all right to do it. I have enough. Does that make sense?
Okay. So you're giving more spontaneously now as things come up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Where most causes I would overlook, and I would say, well, I'm going to give it to my money to a specific cause. But I seem to making smaller donations to help. There's no different groups. We're all one. So I help where I can, not necessarily a large amount, but just and it feels right. Where before I wasn't really in it.
Well, your financial givings is part of your extending yourself, and you're trying to extend yourself to as many other people that you feel are in need as possible. Is that it?
It sounds right.
Okay. Well, that's good, because you're taking on that awareness of that, we are all connected. And so you can share yourself with as many different people as you can. And in that sharing of yourself with others, you're actually sharing it with yourself, because there's really only one of us. So the important thing is the sharing, is the extending. Again, extending in love. That's what sharing is. And if you have that to share, whether it be money or words and counsel or poetry, music, whatever it is that you have to share, you're fulfilling your purpose in doing that as a spiritual being.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. We're on paragraph 6. You have not failed to increase the inheritance of the sons of God, and thus have not failed to secure it for yourself. Since it was the will of God to give it to you, he gave it forever. Since it was his will that you have it forever, he gave you the means for keeping it, and you have done so. Disobeying God's will is meaningful only to the insane. In truth, it is impossible. Your self-fullness is as boundless as God's. Like his, it extends forever and in perfect peace. Its radiance is so intense that it creates in perfect joy, and only the whole can be born of its wholeness. So this is an idealized description of you as a whole, a spiritual being, and not operating out of ego. This is your true self. Your true self is that you have your inheritance from God forever. Your true self is that you have the means of keeping this by sharing it. Remember, it says whatever you give away is what you have. You have whatever you give away, and you're giving away love, you're extending yourself, then that's what you have in return. And it was God's will that you have his love forever. And he gave us the means for keeping it because he created us as spiritual beings. And we have done so even if you don't realize it. Our true selves, our true spiritual selves are in this state. Even if our consciousness is still tied up in ego thinking, that's beside the point, because the ego thinking is an illusion. It's not real. It's just a dream. And that's why disobeying God's will is meaningful only to the insane. Only the ego mind thinks that they can disobey God's will. Spirit mind knows that that's impossible, because we're one. We're one with God. So his will is our will on the spiritual level. So in truth, disobeying God's will is impossible. And remember, truth is a key word here, which means spirit. In spirit, disobeying God's will is impossible. Your self-fullness is as boundless as God's. Why? Because we're the Son of God. We're at one with him. And so, like God's will, when we can extend ourselves forever and in perfect peace. And this radiance of doing that is so intense that it creates perfect joy. And remember, in an earlier section, it said that one of the definitions of spirit is joy, that spirit is pure joy. And this is the only thing that can be born out of this wholeness. So we need to embrace this definition of ourselves that we're being given here. We need to think of ourselves in these terms. We need to understand that we truly are the spiritual sons of God. And the ego thinking is just an illusion. It's a dream. It's not real, and it's destined to fall to the wayside. Did you have something, David? No? Well, our last paragraph for today, number 7, be confident that you have never lost your identity and the extensions which maintain it in wholeness and peace. Miracles are an expression of this confidence. They are reflections of both your proper identification with your brothers and of your awareness that your identification is maintained by extension. The miracle is a lesson in total perception. By including any part of totality in the lesson, you have included the whole. So that's our mission, that's our goal, that's our challenge, is to be confident in our identity as the Son of God. And that the miracles are the expression of this confidence. They're the reflection of this identification. And it includes realizing that all of our brothers are also the Son of God, that there's only one of us. And so we need to be constantly aware of this. And we need to think in these terms. The miracle is a lesson in total perception, meaning spiritual perception. By including any part of totality in the lesson, you have included the whole. And you know that symbolically, that's represented in our ego human bodies. Well, even with plants and animals, it doesn't matter. We have billions of cells that makes up our body. And we've got all different kinds of cells. We've got blood cells and bone cells and muscle cells and nerve cells and skin cells and organ cells, all kinds of different cells. But you take any one cell and you go into its nucleus, and the nucleus has the identical DNA for the entire body. The part of the totality is included in the whole. Every single one of us is like an individual cell in the body of the sonship. And so each and every one of us carries the identical genetic code of God. And each one of us individually is included in the whole, and the whole is included in us. Questions, comments?
So John,
Yes.
something unrelated, but define, I'm confused because I hear people define different terms or words differently. Like the three words that come into mind is soul, spirit, and Holy Spirit. I hear people use them interchangeably. I'm not sure myself what is, how will you define each one and how they relate to each other?
Well, basically, they are interchangeable, but a lot depends on the context. Some people use the soul as being the part of God that inhabits and animates the body. Some people say the Holy Spirit is a separate entity that connects us with God, and that our spirit is our higher self, our spiritual self that tethers to the body and all. And then, but on another level, they are all the same: soul, Holy Spirit, the Spirit, because there's only one of us, and ultimately it's all God. As we were just saying, every piece includes the whole, and the whole is included in every piece. So I wouldn't get hung up on the definitions. I just, read it in the context of whatever it's written. And however you want to think of it will be true for you. And if your definition changes in the future, that's okay too. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No. But the part that you always say about it's all inclusive, it's all a part of one, that makes the best sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking that different traditions use it differently. And I think that's my confusion.
Yes. Yes, that's why it's important to try to get to, the essence of what we're being taught here, and not get hung up on any of the specifics. The ego wants to analyze it all and understand every little piece and everything. And yet the book over and over again is telling us, but there's only one. It's all one. You have to change your mind of how you think about it. It's fine to analyze and figure things out, to a degree, but at the end of all of that, it's recognizing the totality of the wholeness, of the oneness, and being integrated with that.
It always comes back to that.
It does. That's the bottom line.
And every once in a while, I start doing things because not really the understanding, but it's like it's a deeper feeling of something I should be doing or saying, and it's spontaneous. It's not because some things came before the course. Some things I pick up in the course, and other things. It all comes down to, like you keep saying, there's just one of us. We're all one. Everything is one. I'm reading about diet, and I can see where it's we're related to what we eat, and the things that we eat are related to the earth, and it's all one. It's all interrelated, and everything we do affects everything else.
Yes. Everything we do affects everything else. That's right. Well, all righty then. Thank you for joining us this evening, friends. Let's have a moment of silence, please.